All right, everybody, good job today. Now, yes, you guys need to turn around. Thank you very much. Just to reiterate, my name is Kirby Fry. I work with Permaculture. It's a small nonprofit. We operate all over Central Texas. I mean, from San Antonio to New Braunfels to Blanco to Georgetown, Bastrop, McDade, you name it. Our goal pretty much is to help small farms and homesteaders to implement as much sustainable design as possible. And that's really how the Permablitz has got going. I'm a builder, and so I get paid to do all this building, but so much of it isn't sustainable design, and I'm always at the mercy of what the client wants, and it's driven by dollars. So I kind of got tired of that and decided that, well, we just need to collaborate amongst ourselves and install as much good design as possible. And some of you may have heard the term permaculture, some of you may know what it is. I'll spend just a moment talking about what sustainable design is and how we can make use of it here in Texas. So permaculture basically means permanent agriculture. It's a design system for sustainable living, and that's the short definition. If you come away with anything, it's that permaculture is a design system for sustainable living. What makes permaculture different than organic farming and gardening? Well, the keystone of permaculture design, that which holds it up over time, is that we rely a lot on perennial food plants. Not entirely, you still got to have livestock and annual vegetable gardens, but we want to plant as many perennial food plants as possible, and that would include fruit trees, grapevines, blackberries, asparagus, artichoke, sweet potato, you know, whatever you can grow year-round in your property. And fortunately, the further south you come, like, you guys can grow citrus down here. Like, I was looking at some citrus tree over there. That might be an orange tree. In Houston, you can grow citrus. Unfortunately, in Austin, most of our citrus froze back last year. So the things that make permaculture design different than just organic farming is that we rely a lot on perennial food plants. The cornerstone, that upon which all else is built on, is soil and water conservation. So everything we do in permaculture design, the first thing you want to take care of is soil and water washing off your property. So we do a lot of earthworks where we build terraces, swales and berms. We rely a lot on cover cropping. We don't ever leave any soil bare. We now have a keyline chisel plow in the family where we rip furrows into the soil on contour, and that gets air and water into the soil. And so that's what really, to me, distinguishes permaculture from organic farming. And I know our organic farmers can do it right, and a lot of them do, but I've also been to a lot of organic farms where they're plowing up and down a slope and soil is just washing off their farm. And so hopefully you would never see that on a permaculture farm. Our goal is to have zero net soil loss. You might lose a little, but usually you're capturing more soil than you're losing. And back to the easy definition of permaculture is that it's a design system for sustainable living. Well, what makes it a system? Well, it's that we have a set of ethics and principles. And so the first ethic is care of the earth, and I think of that as care of the soil, care of all of the organisms in the soil, care of all species, including people, and then the return of surplus to the system that created that surplus. And so that's what guides every decision we make in building, in gardening, in finance, and business, is those three ethics: care of the earth, care of all species, and return of surplus to the system that created it. The principles of design that we rely on, and there's just three of them, pretty simple. We always want to get the biggest bang for our buck, and that's basically energy efficiency. And that's one reason why we plant so many perennial food plants, because if you till up the soil and plant an annual vegetable garden, and you walk away from that garden for 6 months, you come back and it's probably going to be overgrown with weeds and grasses, and you're back to square one. Whereas if you plant fruit trees and water them for a couple of years, hopefully after 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you come back to that system and it's only gotten better over time. So a good designer is always looking ahead and building things that require the least amount of time, energy, and materials to keep that system running. The definition of a sustainable system is a system that pays for itself over time and its maintenance. And so one example I like to use is rainwater collection system. If I bought a 3,000 gallon rainwater collection cistern, how many times does that tank have to fill up before it finally pays for itself? In photovoltaics, they have a payback period. How many years or how many months does it take to pay for the system over time? The second design principle is that everything serves multiple functions, and the roof is a great example for that. And so the roof primarily keeps the weather off of our heads and protects our houses from rain and sun. But if you put gutters and connect that to a cistern, now the roof is collecting rainwater. If you put photovoltaics up on your roof, now it's collecting solar energy, and you can even put solar water heaters up on your roof to heat water. So you can go from having one function to 4 functions by stacking things up on top of your roof. And so in a permaculture design, we're hoping that everything has at least 3 functions. And then the third principle is redundancy, that every critical and essential function is supported by other resources. So say you need water to farm, well, you may have a rainwater collection system, you may also have a well, and you may also be connected to the city water supply. So you don't ever want to rely on just one source for a critical essential need that you have for you and your family. And even if your rain is your only source of water, don't put it all in one tank. Divide it up into 2 or 3 different tanks in case a tank has a leak and drains or gets contaminated. You basically don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. And so when we design a human settlement, we're always looking to do the things that require the most time and energy as close to the house as possible. And so we design a landscape in zones. And so the things that require the least amount of maintenance tend to be the furthest away from the house, and the things that require the most amount of maintenance tend to be closest to the house. And we're always paying attention to the patterns in the landscape, like where does the sun rise, where does it set, which way does water flow across your landscape. You want to capture as much of it as possible, but we all know that when it floods, you also have to have a plan for getting that water off your property. And so we're just constantly dealing with the flows of energy moving through the landscape. And then, Brian, we were going to talk a little bit about the pond and some of the functions of the pond. And do you want to add anything before I roll into a spiel about the pond?
Yeah, we're hoping really kind of along those things, we're really trying to increase, again, as we kind of stated in the beginning, having a lot of these functions out here, permaculture designs, so that you can kind of come out here and see what those look like and be able to apply those back. So we're going to expand out, and we hope this is kind of like a future learning space that maybe we can do permaculture classes or things like that and have that set up in. So yeah, we can start on the pond.
Well, and regarding functions, like as soon as you introduce water into the landscape, suddenly you start hearing a lot of different sounds. Like frogs are one of the first things that you hear in the landscape. Then the dragonflies, you'll start seeing the dragonflies. And even if you get a few mosquito larvae in there, the dragonfly nymphs and the frog tadpoles will eat those mosquito larvae, and we'll probably put some Gambusia minnows in there. And also, I think landscapes need to be beautiful and inspiring. It's not just about growing food, it's also about growing people. And so we want to have features in the landscape that lure you out into the landscape, like a shaded place to sit, a viewing area where you stand or sit by the edge of the pond, anything that gets you out into the landscape and gives you a reason to slow down and sit down and calm your mind. It's not just about growing food, it should be beautiful. And the more beautiful it is, the more people want to copy it. And so this pond, it's about 15 by 20. The liner we bought is 20 by 30 because you lose some length as the liner goes down and comes up and goes over things. The pond will be about 24 to 30 inches deep. Most plants grow between like 4 and 16 inches, and most of them prefer shallow water. Like when you hear the term constructed wetlands, those are really shallow basins that go from like 0 to 18 inches over 50 feet. And most plants grow in shallow water. Like once you go past 2 feet deep, you usually don't see aquatic plants unless they're floating. And so there are different types of aquatic plants. Some float, like duckweed and parrot feather and fairy fern, and then some are anchored in shallow water, like the horsetail. Pickerel is a little bit deeper. Then there's like submerged plants that actually float underwater, and they're submerged grasses. and they give off a lot of oxygen. And then there's the deeper rooted plants like the lily and the lotus, and they go down about 16 inches, pretty deep. And so you'll notice when you walk up to the pond here that it's got shelves in it. So we're going to have a shelf at 18, at 16, and then the bottom of the pond will be at about 24 to 30. At the end of the pond, we've got it sitting out. It's a skimmer, just like in a swimming pool. And so it's got a little flapper lid on it, and debris from the surface of the pond will get drawn into the skimmer box because there's what, like a 1 3/4 horsepower pump? At the bottom of the skimmer, there's an oak barley mat over the pump, and so water and debris gets sucked into the skimmer, and then it's going to be pumped into a bog system that's going to be a little bit higher than the pond, and that water will fill up the bog and then spill out into the pond, and that'll help clean up the water column and keep the water clear and not so full of algae. Most ponds, so you've got the rim of the pond, and you want to have about 3 inches of what we call freeboard. So the water level is 3 inches below the rim of the pond. Quite often in the skimmer box, you'll have a float switch and a water supply that keeps the water level from ever dropping too far. I don't think we're going to have that yet, but we'll also need to have power out there to run the pump. And the bog will be like a biological filter. It will be full of gravel and have shallow rooted aquatic plants in it, and then the deeper aquatic plants will be in the pond. And so
yeah, so that water, as he was saying, it's going to come be pumped out of the pond, go up into the bog, and then come up through the bottom of the bog. So it's going through rocks and through a lot of the root systems. Those will be bare root planted in there. So those roots are just going to be taking up the whole bog area. And those roots are going to be gathering nutrients that are coming out of there. So instead of us paying for additional money to get filtration systems that require constant maintenance and cleaning and stuff like that, we're really looking at how to use this naturally and how this process happens naturally in nature. And that's through the system of bogs. So there's a book that I was reading, Harvesting Rainwater for the Drylands, and Brad Lancaster talks about that you plant the water first before you plant your tree or your garden, you know. So always thinking about the importance of how do you direct water to the area that you're gonna do, and that really saves you trouble in the end in case if your system fails or you can't get out there to water, you're out of town or something like that. You know that you got these passive features that are gonna attract water and help you get over those times that you can't get service out there.
we were talking about a 5,000 gallon rainwater collection system too.
Yeah, so there's going to be a large, and with that said too, we might even divide that up into smaller ones so we can have multiple tanks of it. But we're going to pull stuff off of this roof here and be able to shoot that across into the yard and different areas. A lot of the features whenever we redesign this area here, because this has been in the shade as this pecan has grown in over the past 10 years, it's really kind of shaded and slowed down a lot of growth out here. So we got to redesign now and start incorporating shrubs that use shade. But all this area over here has got all these water features right here. So we're going to use oyas and other things that are going to be just sustained almost off of just rainwater and some of these other features. So yeah, tomorrow we'll kind of be discussing a little bit about the Burman swale and the gills that we'll be planting in that, and then we'll also kind of review a little bit of the gray water system that we'll be installing over there. So I think that's it, and we might go ahead and jump back on in.
Oh, we want to take a group photograph if y'all don't mind.
Yeah, and if